Welcome back, everyone, to Neuroalchemy, a NeuroSynergy podcast where we explore healing as a multidimensional, nonlinear journey and where science meets soul in grounded, practical, and compassionate ways. I'm your host, Dr. Sarah Young. Here on Neuroalchemy, we slow the conversation down. We define every term as if you're hearing it for the very first time, because clarity creates safety, and safety opens the door to more healing opportunities and possibilities. Today's conversation centers on food, bodies, eating disorders, and diet culture. If these topics have ever felt heavy, charged, confusing, or personal for you, you're invited to listen gently. You can pause, you can skip sections. You can return later. Nothing here needs to be taken in all at once. Encourage everyone just to take a breath. You're not behind. Your nervous system is welcome here. Today, I'm joined by Marcella Raimondo, and I'm genuinely grateful to welcome her to Neuroalchemy. Marcella works with individuals and professionals around eating disorders, chronic dieting, body shame, and diet culture, with a strong commitment to food liberation, body justice, and ending the shame so many people carry around food and their bodies. What I deeply appreciate about Marcella's work is that it's both honest and compassionate. She does not reduce eating disorders to willpower, compliance, or discipline. She understands them as adaptive responses shaped by culture, pressure, trauma, and nervous system survival. Marcella brings a grounded presence to conversations that are often misunderstood or oversimplified. Her work reminds us that healing is possible, not through force or control, but through safety, attunement, and respect for the body. Marcella, I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to Neuroalchemy.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here, and I just really appreciated your introduction and the ways that you brought in how we heal through that compassion and just bringing in nuance and complexity with that, and that just that patience and understanding with that notion that healing is possible. And so thank you so much for that. As you were talking, I just felt myself relaxing more and more in my seat. I'm like, wow, this is going to be a great conversation.
Well, that's so wonderful. Before we move further into the conversation, I'd like to begin by helping us arrive. So, Marcella, how are you arriving today? This could be physically, emotionally, mentally, energetically, spiritually. It could be all of the above because we experience life multidimensionally.
Definitely all of the above. Am coming eager here. I have also coming I got the holiday cold, and so I am over it, but that lingering cough is still a little bit scratchy, and so I can feel that um that physical aspect of me. I am arriving like emotionally of just you know, a lot of complexities going on right now, just like me personally, what's happening in our society, just also ways that there is change. My parents are aging and we are very much in the end of life discussions. And so I've just been carrying that for a few months. And so it's just complexity as well as just gratitude as well, like gratitude for what I have.
Yes, be honoring yourself and be extra loving with yourself at this time, Marcella. It sounds like you are in a very particular season of your life that needs lots of loving, right? We can all use more loving for ourselves, for the people around us all the time. Thank you for sharing that. And for all of our listeners out there, there's no right way to arrive here. However, you're showing up today is enough. I want to start by naming why this conversation matters so much. Many people listening have spent years believing that their relationship with food or their body is a personal failure, that if they just tried harder, found the right plan, or had more discipline, everything would finally settle. But eating disorders and chronic dieting are not problems of motivation, they're protective strategies. Marcella, from your experience, what do you see people most misunderstanding about why eating disorders and body shame develop in the first place?
I'm still struck on the conversation around control, the conversation around being thin, the conversation or the motivation, the motivating aspects about that. And not to say there isn't a place for that, because there is, absolutely. I'm still also struck by the ways that an eating disorders are seen as individual problems or individual shortcomings or individual struggles. And instead of saying like, wow, we live in a society that's pretty harsh when it comes to bodies, pretty judgy when it comes to food. And what are we going to do to really dismantle our societies more so that folks can feel like they can nourish, they can grow, they they can heal. I mean, I feel two sides of eating disorders. I mean, you've said it a couple times, and I'm firmly believe like they are protective factors. There is a protection. There is story that comes with an eating disorder. Often there is this emphasis on getting rid of the eating disorder, and I feel like we would bypass if we immediately focus in so linearly to get rid of someone's eating disorder without, this may sound strange, but without honoring it and without saying like, wow, you took a role in my life that you needed to take, and I want to honor that. And yet it isn't serving me. How do we let go of that? How can we even evolve that on some level? I also feel that with all the individuals that I've worked with, there also is this element that, folks are just very control freaks. They're pretty rigid about it. And when I work with folks with eating disorders, I actually have worked more like we need to develop more boundaries in your life. You're actually taking on too much. You're actually way too flexible. You're actually holding a lot of chaos. You're actually really expansive, and you're very deep in what you hold. These aspects of shallowness, control, rigidity, kind of hardcore. I feel like, no, the folks that I work with eating disorders, there is like often way too much fluidity that I say like, what can we do to contain some of that? And also, where does where do we h how can we create spaces for you where your voice matters, where you can hear your voice as well? For a lot of folks, they're in isolation, a lot of isolation, and many times what they've shared around eating disorders or body image when they come to see me or they're in a group, they have been kind of surprised, or not surprised, but like I've or just really taken back by them sharing that I've never said this out loud. And for them to hear their voice and even the vibration of the energy in the room as they shared out loud, it was jarring for them. It was also liberating for them. It was a process and an opportunity for them to separate themselves, even if it's 1 inch from their eating disorders to looking at who they are. So that is something I wish folks would understand more about eating disorders.
And just by us having this conversation, hopefully you're going to shed some light on things and bring more understanding and knowledge to everyone out there. When we talk about eating disorders, we're referring to patterns of behavior, thought and nervous system response around food and the body that disrupt physical health, emotional well-being, and internal safety. These patterns are rarely about food alone. They're often about control, predictability, worth, and survival. Marcella, how do you explain eating disorders in a way that reduces shame and doesn't reinforce it?
That's a great question because the way shame comes in with eating disorders, the way it comes in even with food relationships and someone's body. The first thing that I do and so many of my colleagues do is just normalize the eating disorder. There's a part of me that I just kind of drop and I say like, well, of course, your eating disorder makes so much sense. Of course you would do that. Of course. What you've shared with me and what you've gone through, I mean, only an eating disorder on some level could even match that intensity. Only an eating disorder can actually provide the coping from what you've had to hold. Of course you've had an eating disorder, and I could see how it has served. I mean, the way eating disorders provide a degree of control, they also provide consistency. You needed that consistency in your life, and the unpredictability of the chaos and the trauma was too much for your nervous system. Eating disorders provide that steadiness. Of course, you would turn to an eating disorders. There's also a way eating disorders provide comfort, and you weren't getting that in your life. Your comfort was conditional. It was based on your performance. Comfort should be unconditional. It could be like, of course, I would comfort you. And so your eating disorder provided that as well. And so it is a lot of normalizing of your eating disorder makes 100% sense. Absolutely.
Alongside that, let's define diet culture. So, diet culture is a system of beliefs that equates thinness with health, morality, and value. It teaches people to override hunger cues, distrust their bodies, and believe their worth is tied to control or appearance. Marcella, how does diet culture quietly sustain eating disorders, even when people believe they're simply being healthy?
Diet culture is so manipulative. It's so oppressive. It's so sneaky. What it has done is that diet culture has created not just an okayness, but a demand. Diet culture has really convinced us that we need to engage in eating disorder behaviors for a thin body. Diet culture says when we look at what diet culture celebrates, like a hypervigilance around food, a degree of discipline, good foods, bad foods, relentless exercise, finding ways to lose weight. Diet culture says do all those things that all of us as eating disorder clinicians say, whoa, that's a red flag for an eating disorder. That's a red flag for going down a very self destructive path. But diet culture celebrates it, demands it. Diet culture also starts to give a very, I would even say, a message of if you aren't doing those things and aren't losing weight, you deserve the bullying that you get. You deserve the ridicule that you get. I can't tell you how many folks who I've worked with who have internalized that and have said at me at times, but I deserve the things people say to me. In their deepest shame. And so diet culture has a way of, I would say, I mean, I know this sounds harsh, but it almost feels like that domestic violent partner that's like, "You deserve that. Look what you made me do. You angered me to the point where I had to hit you." And then like, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." And then, where the person is like their nervous system and their trauma bonding is just it's so intertwined. And so diet culture starts to create something that mimics that of, "Look what you did. Now you're in a place where you're being bullied, but it's your fault." Yeah, so I have strong feelings about diet culture.
As you should. One of the lenses we always bring to neuroalchemy is the nervous system. Body shame is not just a thought pattern, it's a physiological experience. When bodies feel monitored, judged, or unsafe, the nervous system moves into protection. Restriction, control, or disconnection can become coping strategies. Marcella, can you speak to how body shame lives in the nervous system, not just the mind?
That's a great question. And it's making me actually sink deeper into my own body as you're asking that. Body shame, like first it starts to really strip away at our internal wisdom and our gut that like tells us when a situation is safe, when it's not. Body shame takes away that kind of safe, and I keep going back to wisdom because I really believe that we all hold that in our bodies, but our nervous systems can override that. So body shame can just take those feelings away from our body. Body shame, when it starts to happen, also takes like the joy from our bodies, like things we like to do, ways we struggle with pleasure in our bodies, where it becomes a very convoluted experience. And so body shame can take that away. We begin to separate ourselves from our bodies. And so what can start to happen with that is ways that we don't allow our bodies to be our bodies. Like our bodies change. And so ways that body shame can take over is that our bodies age, and ways that we fight that, ways that body shame or that those messages can really also start to take over for folks who are exploring what gender means to them, or for folks who just really feel that I'm not in a body that aligns with who I am gender wise. And that disconnection can start to happen, as opposed to what if we let that process happened, and how someone can start to connect. So body shame just really starts that disconnection from our.
What happens when safety is introduced? How does healing shift when people stop fighting their bodies?
What can happen is, when people stop fighting their bodies, there is a what I have seen is a way that folks begin to notice all aspects of their body. And the first thing folks start to notice is the things they say to themselves. And so, like with body shame, they notice, this is what I say to myself every time I look in the mirror. This is what I say to myself every time I put something on. Particularly if I notice if a clothing is rubs up against my body, like, so they start to talk about all the things that they say to themselves, and how they try to bring in different language. It is something I share with them, of that when they start to notice, and when they start to move into healing, is becomes this really heightened awareness of, I say these things to myself all the time. And what we often start off is saying that, okay, what if you began to use different words, just something different? And I ask them, point out a word that you say. And then we sit and we're like, oh, and we experience like, that is a cruel word. And I'm like, let's just sit with that. Like, would you ever say that to anybody? And they're like, absolutely not. That is what a horrible thing. What a hurtful thing. I'm like, "And you're carrying that." And I'm like, "Let's just swap out a word." I get you're not maybe on board, but wow, that word. And so we really feel that word. And then with the body and tapping into the body, it's like, what word feels right for you? Because they're like, "I'm not gonna say my body's beautiful." I'm like, I hear that, and that would be such a bypass, because it still wouldn't be healing with your body and your nervous system. But let's get in touch with your body and your nervous system. What word feels like, I can go with this word? And so finding that is often a way that folks like start that healing process, by listening and attuning to their bodies as well, and saying like, what feels safe, what doesn't feel safe, and pointing out like, I feel safe saying this. I don't feel safe saying that. Because often what I could be is just like what feels like a really fast, like, well, I should be able to do this, and I should be able to just, why can't I just love my body? And I'm like, well, that also is also judgy and morality based, when it kind of flips its head on that, because it's still coming back to shaming you and pointing out you're defective, as opposed to you're holding pain. And we just need to find ways on your terms to start to Start for you and your body to say, what's okay right now? What can I do differently right now?
I think it's so important to really learn how to honor ourselves in the healing process, to be accepting of wherever we are, whatever we're going through in the process of healing, to really, hold that space for yourself. Because honestly, at the end of the day, we're the only ones that are in this body, this mind, these emotions, right? 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're the only ones that are really doing that. And we could look at that as being overwhelming, but if you really think about it, that's an amazing opportunity to change everything around if we choose. Let's talk about food and body liberation. Now, liberation doesn't mean chaos. It doesn't mean ignoring our health. What it does mean is restoring choice, attunement, and trust. Food liberation reconnects people to hunger, fullness, pleasure, and satisfaction. Body liberation recognizes that bodies are diverse, dynamic, and worthy of care at every size. Marcella, how do you help people understand that healing does not require shrinking their body to be valid?
Mm. I love the part where you start off around with food liberation or food and our choices, because so much of what is around someone's food choices is around what is this going to do to my body. And then folks also have shared with me, and this can get complicated. So it's like, is that what folks share with me is that, are you saying in order for me to heal, I have to gain weight? And what I tell them is like, no, that's really not what I am saying. However, I do want to hold and have a place where gaining weight is not the worst thing in the world that's going to happen to you. Like, just like while I'm saying, no, my goal isn't for you, like you must gain weight, I'm also saying if you also gain weight, we can't hold it as the worst thing in the world that is going to happen to you. And with that, also knowing that society is going to have a reaction to you going from a smaller body to a less smaller body. So I'm not at all dismissing that. That can come with some societal jabs at you. So we're not going to sit here, and I'm not going to sit here and be all Pollyanna, like, it doesn't matter if you gain weight or not, because our society is harsh around that. So we're going to hold all of this together. We're also going to hold the fact that while I want you to make choices around food, there may be an accessibility and financial aspect in your choices and what you can do as well. And I, especially feel that the way food prices, grocery prices have gone up. There was a time, especially the way food benefits were jeopardized. So I can't do this work around food liberation without looking at people's access to food. So I also hold that. What I tell folks is that, coming back to a relationship of trust, does involves time, it involves patience, it involves trying again. And it involves in ways of like, we learn how to ride a bike by having training wheels. And then at some point, the training wheels came off. And so folks often share that I don't trust myself around food. And what I share is, and they said, like, if I brought in a box of cookies in the house, I'd eat the entire box, Marcella. And I share that, I could see that, and you probably would right now because you've led a life of deprivation. You've led a life of this restricting. You led a life of like this push pull away from pleasurable foods. So I'm not going to ask you to bring a box of cookies in your house right now because you probably will eat them all, and then you'll feel like this is hopeless. This is hard. And I don't want you to say, well, then try again. Next week, bring in another box. Maybe you'll eat a third, only 3/4 of the box. Like, why keep doing that? So often share, like, why don't you do this? Why don't you go to a cafe or someplace where you have like one cookie and you're there having that one cookie, and then that is it. Or you go, so that way you're not bringing home the entire box. Or you can go to a grocery store or some place where they have these single servings of something, like just get that. because I don't want to set up a relationship where then you are learning by these like what can feel like failures, or like I have to go through this shame in order to get like 1 ounce of learning and healing from that. Often there does come with a what we often call like more contained experiences. So that way folks can feel like, okay, this is where I am. This is contained. This is my nervous system. Okay. This is where I could feel like I can manage this as I start to make shifts in my food.
One of the most important truths you hold is that healing from eating disorders, chronic dieting, and body shame is possible. Many people believe they are too far gone, that this is just how they are. From your experience, what actually supports sustainable healing?
From my experience, I have asked folks, let's take a look at what is happening for you. Let's take a look at where you need to go and what your eating disorder is trying to tell you. For some folks, when they've worked with me and we sit down and they tell me what you've eaten today. Tell me a 24-hour food recall. Tell me what's emotionally going on. For some folks, I'll point out that you are in a state of deprivation. Every meal seems to be contained, and then you binge at nights, and then you start the cycle all over again. And so for folks, they are like, they feel like this is my cycle, or that this is my life. There's no way in the world I can get out of this cycle. And so we, for folks who are caught in this like chronic dieting, and then I cheat, chronic dieting, and then I cheat. We talk about the role of deprivation. We talk about what kind of food messages you get. We talk about body image, and sharing with folks that we need to do things like one step at a time. And so when folks start to bring in some of the quote unquote forbidden foods in the morning and in the afternoon, the desire to binge goes down, or to quote unquote cheat. So sharing with folks like, when we start to make the smallest shifts, you might be surprised what can happen for folks. For other folks who are often, it feels like they are so relentlessly in a very strong binge eating disorder, just severity. There's often tremendous trauma with that. And I tell folks like, we need to find a way to start to do the trauma work simultaneously, because I point out that until we start doing some of that trauma work simultaneously with the binge eating, nothing is going to work. And and so because you're binging, because it is the only thing that can really cope with the trauma that is so deep for you. And so this is why this feels hopeless. And so we can start to make some of those some with folks who are engaging in a lot of, like, really severe restricting and severe exercising, like, on with those behaviors, there is what we focus on a lot is, like, tell me the role of your eating disorder. Tell me, like, 'cause they'll share, this is my eating disorder voice talking, and so there's a lot of, "Tell me about this voice. Tell me about what we can do," as well as also pointing out that they need you for us to do like one behavior differently. You don't get like, we will pick something. So it might be, oh, you don't have breakfast. I want you to try having breakfast. I don't care what you eat, but just start having something. For some folks who are engaged in a lot of excessive exercise, it's like, we need to talk about taking one day off. If you do it the rest of it, okay. So it's just a way of like of saying like, we need to really understand the role of your eating disorder and do one behavioral change that is different. And this is something that I recommend to folks who feel like, I am so far gone that there's absolutely nothing I can do. I'm going to have this eating disorder for the rest of my life. And I hear that pain, and I always want to have a place for that pain, that really hopeless pain. Like, this feels so unhealable and saying like, I want that pain to keep talking and sharing what feels unhealable and make a voice for that and seeing like, what do we need to do to heal that and really have that voice be heard as well as simultaneously like what behavior changes are we going to do differently in your life. And again, I don't care what we start. And for me, small is good. Small behavior shifts are really good. And I also tell folks that, we may agree on a behavior change and then they come back saying, I wasn't able to do it. I'm a failure. And I say like, that's also information if you weren't able to do it. And let's talk about what came up for you. And perhaps also hear like what was it that where you felt like a failure? You didn't do it, or maybe you felt like you let me down. Like that also is important and it brings up that relational aspect that I think God, everyone in any disorder, there is a relational aspect of something that happened in their lives or ways that they were loved by their performance, what they could do. There was a lot of conditions. And so that also brings up an opportunity of can do this differently.
In my own journey, I have found that every time I was able to essentially overhaul everything, the way that I did it with the were through those small microscopic changes that you and I were just talking about. That one shift, that one tiny thing done consistently, right? Until it was embedded, and then doing another little stacking that shift very slowly over time, like a sculpture, not like a build Rome in a day. And I feel like a lot of times people expect that they want to heal, and them wanting that so much, they have this expectation of themselves. Well, I should just be faster, or I should just do more, right? And sometimes we don't really give credit enough to those small daily practices that can really create such amazing change. Marcella, we always invite our guests on Neuroalchemy to offer a gentle invitation for the week. I used to call them challenges, but I like invitation a little bit better energetically. So, do you have maybe one small nervous system safe practice that you'd like to invite the listeners to explore over the next week?
There's some number of things I would love folks to do. One thing that I ask this of everyone whom I work with, and I've alluded to this here. Yet I do want to emphasize of like taking some time to ask in a very curious and compassionate way, what is this behavior doing for me right now? What role is it serving? It is doing something for me right now. What is it doing? And also like, is it aligning with my values? And that might be another exercise of, well, what are my values? But starting off with what is this doing for me right now? Because it is doing something.
I love that. So, and it doesn't have to be related to food if that's not something that you're struggling with, but if you guys could just identify maybe a behavior that you would like to be better, or you would like to improve yourself somehow, right? We invite you to just ask yourself how that particular behavior is serving you, because there is something there. The stuff isn't just you misbehaving, right? All behaviors, they all have a reason. And so Marcella's just asking you to be open to the possibility of this was created to serve me. And you might find it's not serving you anymore, but that's an opportunity to and expand your awareness. You don't need to fix it, you don't need to correct it, but that awareness is often the first place to begin. Marcella, as we begin to close, what do you hope listeners walk away with after hearing our conversation today?
I hope listeners will walk away with not only do you deserve to have a loving and nourishing and balanced and calm relationship with food and your body, It is also your right and how you were born. I one of my favorite activists, Sonia Renee Taylor, she talks about we were born as beings connected to ourselves. We were born as beings of love and light. And so it is a reminder that we were born knowing our what we were born knowing, like, when am I hungry? When am I not? What do I want to eat? What do I not want to eat? Like, we had that in us. And while it might feel like that is as far away, that is gone, there was absolutely no way in the world I could ever come back to that or tap into that. I wanna say, like, well, that has never left. We just need to come back to that. And yes, it's a journey, but that has not left you.
That is beautiful. And for all of you out there, how to reach out to Marcella will, as always, be available in the show notes. Marcella, thank you for the clarity, compassion, and depth you bring to this work. Your voice is a powerful reminder that our relationships with foods and our bodies are not broken. They've been shaped by culture, pressure, and survival. Before we close, I want to name this. Guys, I never leave these conversations unchanged. There's always something that I take with me, something that I'll reflect on, and something that I'll continue to integrate long after the conversation is over. And if this episode resonated with you, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing it. That's how these conversations travel. That's how they reach the people who need to hear them the most. To our listeners, thank you for being here with openness and courage. Healing does not require force, it requires safety, support, and patience. Until next time, this is Dr. Sarah, and this is Neuroalchemy. You are not failing, you are learning, you are becoming. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.